So, welcome everyone, and thanks to Salvatore D'Acunto for being here in Bergamo and for making possible a comparison between scholars who share the idea that capitalism is a monetary economy of production, where instabilities can be understood just stressing the necessity to a regulation, moreover, obviously, of the financial markets. Two words in order to present Salvatore D'Acunto. He is Associate Professor of Political Economy at the University of Campania with Giovanni Vitelli, and he has written many essays on macroeconomic instability with a great focus on the consequences in the economic policy, moreover at European level, and in order to stress the big problem of institutional delays, to be gentle. He does this by using a great knowledge of economic theory, and I think he is one of the most master of mathematics applied to economics. And another characteristic in Salvatore's way to do research is the interdisciplinary. Indeed, he invites to the dialogue other scholars from other disciplines, moreover law, but also political sciences. And I really appreciate to end my presentation a talent that I find in Salvatore. He takes complex concepts and he eliminates the superfluous, and he makes them as understandable as possible. And he did this also in latest book, and in particular in the chapters we are discussing today, where he actually gives a original reading, a personal reading of the theory of monetary circuit. But he does so surreptitiously, with the aim of shedding light on what is most relevant to the discussion of economic policy and of the institutional context to which apply economic policy today. A globalized world, and a globalized world prone to increasingly violent crisis. But let's go to the heart of the matter of the today discussion. Thank you also to other colleagues that are here, and after I will leave the floor to them, Professoressa Anna Maria Variato and Professoressa Maria Cristina Barbieri Goés. In the building of my consideration, of my notes, I had also the help by Dr. Hervé Baron, that is also here today. And I will be also a means to pose to your attention some notes that I discussed before together with Hervé Baron. So my presentation will be divided in these bullet points. So I will present briefly the benchmark of monetary circuit framework that was proposed by D'Acunto in Conflitto, sociale, instabilità e modelli di regolazione, social conflict, macroeconomic instability, and model of regulation. After, I will propose following D'Acunto suggestion the role of financial markets inside this kind of model, in the neoclassical perspective and in the heterodox perspective. We then underline what may mean the term bubbles in this context. And if I have some time, I will also show some little exercises that I prepare with Excel in D'Acunto's perspective. So this is the framework of monetary circuit presented in Salvatore D'Acunto book. It is not the same one that I explained you at the beginning of the course, because as you may immediately see, here we have two different sectors. Firms that produce capital goods and firms that produce consumption goods. And it is very relevant for the reasoning I'm going to summarize. One of the assumptions that dominates mainstream financial economics is that the financial markets systemically channel all savings into investments in capital goods. According to this approach, financial markets would be the main place where savers meet with enterprises. The former want to find profitable opportunities, the latter want funds to finance the expansion of their production capacity. This is the core of the reasoning proposed by Salvatore in using monetary circuit approach. Why Salvatore did this? Because the point of critique that he has chosen. Indeed, he won't stress the fact that the most relevant feature of financial markets is not the capacity to channel savings, but is the risk of speculation. What is the mechanism that is described in this figure? First of all, as in a traditional monetary circuit approach, banks decide to create liquidity and they decide to allocate, for example, 2/3 of it to consumer goods enterprises and the rest, 1/3, to capital goods enterprises. Obviously, both enterprises will use resources to employ waged workers. And the initial finance, it will be the sum of these two loans, 1,200 in the example proposed by Salvatore. Second step, workers consume just a part of the wages, in the example by Salvatore, 90%, to consume consumption goods. Workers are interested just in consumption goods. And save the remaining 10%, that at the end of the computation, you will see it will be 120. Okay, apparently, enterprises' collections are lower than that what enterprises owe to banks. But we are just considering the fact that firms' consumption goods will not create part of resources that will be used for acquiring capital goods. This is the novelty of the Salvatore model in the space of monetary circuit. Indeed, capital goods firms realize a profit that is equal to the amount of total consumption bought by workers. And the rate of profit may be simply computed in these passages, because we have that the initial finance is the sum between 400 and 800. And the amount of consumption goods purchased by workers are 1,080. So 1,080 minus the initial finance just for firms that produce consumption goods will be 280, the difference between this and this, on the amount of initial finance for firms' consumption goods, and we have a benchmark, the rate of profit, that is the 35%, that is given by this ratio, the difference between 1,080, 800, on the initial finance, 800, and it will be 35%. And it will be also the benchmark for the other sector, because firms that produce capital goods will see the rate of profits obtained by firms that produce consumption goods, and they will consider this rate of profits as a name also for them. Then the other passage is that profit rate should be the goal of capital enterprises. And let me propose you a quotation from the book. Enterprises must respect a profitability constraint. They must guarantee their shareholder satisfactory profits. So if they had to pay 400 to hire labor, then the counter value in money of the capital goods would have to be greater than 400. To be precise, it should be 400 plus the rate of profit 35% times 400. And if we do the computation, it should be 540. Another step, demand for capital goods comes mainly from firms that produce consumption goods. So the 540 that represent the aim to encounter exactly the homogeneous rate of profit that in our computation is 35%, is also exactly the amount of money that capital goods firms may ask for selling their capital goods to consumption goods firms. And it is also a technological constraint. Without capital goods, consumption goods firms cannot produce in future. So they must pay this amount, and this is also the channel to obtain a first quota for the repayment to the loans to the banking sector by the capital goods firms. I'm just a few steps before the end of this example. So consumer goods enterprises must use their receipts. They have now 1,080 amount of monetary power after the purchasing to workers, and they must use this amount to pay for capital assets, but they still have to pay their shareholders by distributing to them the declared profits and the debt incurred with the banks. Once the profits have been distributed to the shareholders, the amount of 2,280, there remains an amount that is less than what they owe to banks, because at they have just at the end 2,060 that may be considered as a provision, as a deposit that is at the moment in cash, just for repaying part of the loans, because the total amount of the loans is 800. What may be the way to obtain also the rest of the amount? Here we have the role of financial markets. So financial markets emerge as an institutional necessity within this simple monetary circuit model, and they are assigned the task of finding the 540 missing to close the circuit. That is exactly the difference between the initial finance for consumption goods firms and the provision they have already taken to cash. We note, however, that both the workers and owners and shareholders of the two types of enterprises have set aside positive account balances. If you see the figures, there are 120 that are the worker savings and 420 that are the dividends distributed to the entrepreneurs. These monetary sums together, the savings by workers and the amount of profits distributed to shareholders, both to the first type of the firms and the second type of the firms, so 280 plus 140. This total amount of monetary resources are exactly the entire savings of the system. The saving will be channeled to financial market. In this way, the amount that is necessary for consumption good firms for repaying loans are found. So, for simplicity, we may assume that the only form of fruitful use of savings is purchasing shares issued by exactly the consumption goods firms. Here, I would like to comment, is one of the secret aspects of valorization, what one might call financial command over production. In fact, shares represent nothing more than rights to possible future earnings. It is precisely the consumption goods enterprises, driven by the need to raise the money to be returned to banks, that will promise these rights to future earnings to those who buy the shares. After recovering the loans granted to capital goods enterprises, banks also recover the total amount of credits. Thus, the circuit closes in equilibrium. So what D'Acunto shows in the rest of the chapter is some very simple exercises. I have not the time to show you these exercises, but I just want to sum up the main conclusion. First, an increase in the share of investment in the system shifts income in favor of entrepreneurs against, obviously, the income of waged workers. Secondly, every increase in the propensity of workers to save, so if we have thrifty workers, will shift income in favor of workers. Third exercise, an increase in wages, and this could be very interesting, especially for the Russian economist. An increase in wages does not exert any appreciable impact on the distribution of income because the resulting imbalances between demand and supply of consumer goods will trigger changes in relative prices, and these changes will neutralize the wage increase and will reconfigure the distribution prior to the shock. The last example, we have a similar outcome by the increase in labor productivity. Obviously, in the hypothesis of labor saving innovation, for example, and these have a major impact on the intra-class distribution of workers. Workers who remain unemployed as a result of the increase in labor productivity will remain excluded from the access of consumption goods. In order to challenge the neoclassical idea that financial markets can systematically convey the total amount of savings in investment in capital goods, D'Acunto hypothesizes that some agents decide not to use their savings. In this exercise, I'm showing you, and that they hoard part of the amount of money. As you may see, we have a new block, a new box in this second slide, and this is exactly money hoarding. So just to go faster, what is relevant in the D'Acunto reasoning is that the motivation of money hoarding, that obviously, as I also explained to you in our previous lecture, is found in a systemic uncertainty of a monetary economy of production, is also positively correlated with speculative motives. Okay. After I will say something in a perspective of the history of economic thought by following a suggestion by Hervé Baron. But let me just stress a point. Neoclassical theory does not recognize that the demand for financial assets will increase as the price of shares increases. And this is also the starting point of the behavioral finance, a critique of the demand function of assets in financial markets. Okay. Instead, neoclassical theory treats shares like any other commodity. Therefore, it believes that a situation of financial crisis can be stopped in light of the fact that investors would immediately be ready to increase the purchase of shares if their price falls. But in this way, we cannot explain the phenomenon of bubble. That is exactly a phenomenon that we have because the market value goes higher than the fundamentals value. And in this situation, the demand for financial assets will be an increasing curve, not a decreasing curve in terms of prices. Okay, let me just conclude. I will maybe come back to the Excel exercises at the end of discussion because I want to leave the floor to other colleagues. D'Acunto, as Hervé Baron suggested me, is managing to put together two different books by John Maynard Keynes that generally, for example, in Graziani's perspective, are considered one versus the other. Obviously, I'm referring to the Treatise of Money and the General Theory. The circuit that I explained to you, that D'Acunto proposes in chapter 1 of the book, in fact, is more Treatise of Money oriented. And the circuit, it represents a sort of lower level of abstraction than the one presented by Graziani. On first reading, the circuit presented in the chapter 1 did not pose major problems regarding, for example, the monetization of profit, presenting as savings that are formed in the two sectors. However, it would be present problems if we will introduce interest repayment. But for D'Acunto, in D'Acunto's perspective, companies only return the capital to the banks and not the interest, because this is the best way to stress other motivation of crisis, other possible motivation of the crisis that probably, in his perspective, is most relevant than the problem of the monetization of profits. In the second chapter, D'Acunto analyzed the role of financial markets as defined as saving raters, however, using almost all the paraphernalia of the general theory, and also the liquidity propensity. And by means of this structure, it is understandable why financial markets in general and stock markets in particular can be the cause of economic disruption. Obviously, why? Because if we have, I cannot enter in the details of the computation, but if we have money hoarding, obviously it will cause a decreasing amount of money in the circuit, and it will be lead to the impossibility to repay the total amount of loans to banks, at least in this period. So the decision of the bank will be crucial. The banks may decide to refunding for the next period firms that were not able to repay the loans in the present or not. If they will, for example, considering this kind of firms not able to have liquidity, for example, by changing the computation of risk assessment, then we will encounter a problem also in the real economy, because these firms must probably should be put outside the market. And then we will encounter unemployment and so on. Okay. The combination of this kind of notes together, my opinion, leads to three main questions. First one, how important is concretely the role of the interest rate allowance to understand the real monetary circuit and also the real function of financial markets at historical level. Secondly, what kind of institutional structure can correspond to the concept of financial repression that at the end of the chapter is proposed following Keynes by Salvatore D'Acunto as a solution, a political solution of the speculative risk that we may have on financial markets. And at last, is it really possible to make a principle of compensation in the sense of financial markets through lie reduced to intermediaries who facilitate investment projects in real economy? Is it really possible to make that this principle, that is a very Keynesian one, prevail over the principle of speculation, the principle of liquidity, in the sense of the idea that we have to facilitate the liquidation of securities to put the financial markets as the steam engine of capitalism. So I leave the floor to Anna Maria Variato and to Maria Cristina Barbieri Goés, but we have just one chair. So first of all, I ask for the intervention by Anna Maria, and after we may leave the floor to Maria Cristina. Okay, well, Maria, can you? Yes, I will shift from there. I stop the division, and that's all.
Okay. So, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for this opportunity to discuss this book, which is interesting to me in many respects. I just apologize because I focused on the two chapters which are presented today. So I say in advance that maybe if I make comments which are related to the chapters after the second, I've not read them, and maybe you have an obvious answer to those questions. So let me try to summarize the main observation and suggestions and flavors that I've taken from reading after reading your two chapters. First of all, the things that I realize that you write your first chapter as a critique. So you imply to criticize the neoclassical framework, and so this is not supposed to be read as a chapter in which we are supposed to take as your representation of the real working of the economic system, but it is supposed to be read as, look, this is the way in which neoclassical perspective is going to present the behavior of the system. And so in this respect, I say, at first reading, I did not realize that this was so. And so at some times I was saying, oh, gosh, this is a neoclassical framework. And so this is not what I would like to read as a critique to the neoclassical model. So and I say, look, I'm presenting something that I want to criticize strongly, and this is the first chapter, would be more clear in this respect. And so, obviously, what it comes is that after the first chapter, you have money, which is inessential, and finance is inessential because they are there in the system, but in the end, they end up not being useful for the working of the system in the sense that they do not make any difference. Okay, and so this is the point. Obviously, coherent with a framework which is neoclassical, but except from this, there are passages like at page 20 in which you say the role of saving is the one to finance the accumulation and the accumulation of a specific part of capital. And so it's like the financial markets and savings are simply the way through which savings transform into investment, nothing else. It is, to me, quite a reductive representation of what is the function of saving in a real economy, especially in a monetary economy of production, or even more in a more sophisticated system, which is a financial economy of production, which is even the step further, and also in general, in the same page, you say exactly the opposite. Is not savings, which are the precondition for investment. You say it is exactly the opposite, and so it is investment which is going to induce savings. And again, this is not true in the real world. Inside the neoclassical framework, according to the homogeneity assumption behind the model are true, but they are not true in general. And even in your model, if you assume that wages are not uniform, if you assume that prices are different, if you assume that the rate of profits are not homogeneous. So as soon as you remove those homogeneity assumptions, which are a simplification, which is useful to your argument, neoclassical argument, and you take away those assumptions, then even in your circuit, those statements become somehow shaky or in need to be qualified. But this is not a critique. It is just to say that the neoclassical. We both, I think, we don't like the neoclassical framework because they do not give any meaning to money and finance. Okay, so let's take this standing point. We want to have both money and finance to be relevant, and in this respect, I think that my favorite idea to represent finance is that finance is going to be the means through which time becomes money. So finance is simply the way which allows us to transform, to take time and transform it into money. Okay, this and in the limit, it may become that time is money if things happen in a very fast, continuous, and frictionless, purely theoretical environment. And so, with respect to these, my points are then these ones. Do you think that really a framework like the circuit is the good instrument to conceive this idea? So, I mean, I'm not sure. On one side, I understand the circuit as a good framework to lead us to respect some accounting needs, and so the circuit is a framework in which we are supposed to have a balance into the flows and the stocks inside the system, and so we understand that maybe what is good for a micro does not hold for macro, and the macro is the circuit. But as long as you represent the circuit as a final statement, as a picture, this picture is compatible with any kind of narrative, so history, which is able to explain the stock and the flows. And so it can be your narrative that you build up and you say this is Keynesian, but it could be also neoclassical as soon as the stock and flows are conditions are met. And so if we want to stress the difference between one perspective against the other, I think that we have to put finance into the framework, which is a dynamic framework. So you need to have dynamic conditions, and in your exercise, you do not have dynamic conditions. You have equilibrium conditions, and so my curiosity then is, okay, I take your point. I think that we have to criticize the neoclassical framework, which is let's say static and does not take into account many aspects, but I'm not sure that this framework, this representative framework, is the one in which we can gain the alternative representation, which is going to be superior to the neoclassical one. And in fact, in order to be able to close and to use your representative scheme, you need to undergo to many simplification in the representation in order to be able, and so you are compelled to accept many reductions of homogeneity. Otherwise, even this picture does not come so easy as you present in the chapters. And so maybe I'm wrong. So as long as I'm not a circuitist, an expert in circuit, then I'm saying okay, if this is my partial understanding due to my partial knowledge of the instrument, maybe you have a satisfactory answer to my perplexity. Then I take the things that are intriguing to me because basically those kind of questions are the same that I always indicate as a researcher, and so. In some sense, not in some sense, you are saying in the end, I don't remember whether in the first or in the second chapter, that the point of a history of capitalism is to be and the struggle among the classes in and power is related to the capability to govern the decision of investment by firms, the decision to address the money by banks, and the decision to split the intertemporal decision among consumption and saving for workers. And I think that these are exactly the things that are the issues of power, and I think that they are still the issues that we have today to face. So, for the benefit of students, do you think that historically those three things have exercised a different role? For example, let's say at the beginning, before the 80s, it was the concern, the strategy of those who wanted higher slice of the cake was played, giving attention especially on the first issue. And so first, I control investment. And then, let's say, from the 80s until the 2007 period, it was the second, and so the role of banks to play a major role in order to increase profits. And then in the end, now we have that we may say that in the latest years, and especially, for example, through the decision of the central bank of Europe, we are trying to pursue the same strategy using the decision of consumption for workers. And so do you think that behind, in some sense, that behind the policy, the monetary policy that we have is not the control of inflation, but the attempt to induce workers to be more parsimonious, which is in the end, not for the benefit for workers, but for the higher profits of firms. And so this is just a curiosity. I'm not, but I find intriguing this issue. And then a final observation. So the scope of this narrative is more to explain instability, the issue of instability, or more to explain one of the most important issues, which is the link between distribution and instability. So your point is, okay, instability was explained by many, but and distribution was explained by many. But my effort is to create a link between the two issues and to explain that they are not independent. And so, which way we try to create a connection between those two pillars of the explanation, which are usually taken as independent, but which are not. And so this is very intriguing to me, and obviously I believe that those financial markets are going to be the channel through which endogenous instability can come into the model. But again, I'm afraid that the circuit with this framework, which is static, ex post. So it is a constraint with the accounting at the end of a year, which is not compatible with the thing which is going to give a meaning of financial market, which is not only the place for speculation, but the place where we take care of disappointing expectations. So one point, and so this is my last comment. Of course, as a Keynesian, I totally agree with the fact that speculation is at the heart of financial market. But as far as I read Keynes, speculation in Keynes is not given a negative moral attitude. Speculation is simply the fact that we struggle against uncertainty in order to fill the gap of our knowledge. So we are very proactive with respect to the future. We do not know the future. And so in order to be able to undertake decision, we have to tame our uncertainty. And so we substitute this lack of knowledge with our conjectures. And so speculation is in the Latin word. We simply project our idea of the future into our decision. And so it doesn't matter whether we are right or wrong, but we behave as if we are right, as if the future that we imagine is going to be there, and we go there with this idea. And financial market gives us the time, the precious instrument to see whether we are right or not. We are not going there because we want to do something to harm others. We don't want to exploit others, not necessarily. We simply want to have enough time to discover that we are right. We are the winner of our idea of the future. And this speculation may be also the speculation of a government. The government say, okay, please finance my projects because I believe that our society will be better than the ones that and so please trust me, give me the money, and in the future, if I'm able to pay back, this means that I won this bet. And so financial market are those places where we may compare our beliefs about the future, and to say, oh, of course they are different. And in the end, someone will be small, disappointed, highly disappointed. And so financial markets are going to be there in order to provide liquidity. And so it's not so bad not to have liquidity. I'm not sure that to tame liquidity is going to be the solution, because without this function, we will not have time to be better, to have the trust to change. And so, thank you. So these are the points.
So first of all, thank you, Stefano, for the invitation, and thank you, Salvatore D'Acunto, for coming here to Bergamo to discuss with us this book that I found very well written, and also for didactic purposes also perfect, because it does these simplifications that some of them I agree with Anna Maria, but some of them for didactic purposes are wonderful, because for teaching our graduate students, we know that it's not a very easy task. So I will connect some of my questions with points made by Anna Maria and also by Stefano. The first one is, well, I'm also a Keynesian, but from a slightly different perspective. I come from a perspective where in growth models, demand plays a key role. So my first doubt, and it's a point for discussion, I think. It's where's the role of the key role for demand in such models? Because we blame speculation and the market for not or for stopping the liquidity that comes from banks and the financial markets into the firm sector. But from our perspective, firms invest or the economy grows because there's demand for their products. So that's why they invest. So maybe there's one step that we should go further, which is firms do not even require loans from banks because they do not want to invest. We are in a highly financialized world where there's a logic of redistribution of shares or of dividends of firms, and not of reinvesting and growing anymore. So, and this connects very well with your approach, I think, which is the one of saying that a new consensus was built. No, a new consensus was built because the workforce was very weak in this moment, because there's no economic growth, because there's no investment, because unemployment goes up because of this kind of dynamic. So this is one piece. The other piece is more on the policy side, and I connect to it, Stefano, which is the role of the interest rate in this process. I also understand that can be one simplification that also helps you present the model, but I think it's very important because, at least for the perspective where I come from, interest rates are a very important channel to discuss distribution, to discuss the cost of firms. It's one very important channel, for example, for if you think about the transition to a green economy, where the cost of green energy and the transition to renewable is very much impacted by the increasing interest rate scenarios that we are seeing at the moment. So what's the role to give to interest rate and to have some kind of policy implication? There is a point which I think I'm not going to raise because it's a bit out of the two chapters that the two other discussed, which is the role of the international monetary system. But if you want to comment a little bit on that, there's more instability and more problems related to the liberalization that emerges from that. I think you talk a little bit more about that at the end of the book, which I think it's also very interesting. So what's your point also for the future? Because we see, for example, this week, the Bank for International Settlements published a report discussing supply chains. So already in trade, we're seeing some shifts in the trends of liberalization. So where do you see this helping you, with your point, with building a new consensus for changing what we have at the moment, which is a very liberalized world of trade and finance at the same time? So do you see that there's a shift coming there, or you see that we are gonna, or it's gonna get worse, or are we gonna stay at the same point as we are? In the context of the transition. Connected to the last point, because I think we are a bit on a time constraint, and I really want to see the comments by Salvatore. Well, one way to reconcile conflict, growth, and interest rate, I think it's the allegory of the Pasinetti index, which is one way that we could bring to this kind of approaches, which is a policy rule that connects the growth rate of labor productivity, the growth rate of wages, and the interest rate, which is, I think, a point that we could try to include in our models to see if we have some interesting policy implications. Very last point. What's the role? I mean, what's the role of also fiscal policy in this context? Because I think it's a key issue, because whereas we cannot see so much if you think only in terms of money and interest rate, we can see a lot in terms of fiscal policy, because with fiscal policy we can actually arrive in a point where demand and also wages grow, and we can solve the problem of instability at the same time. Kind of.
not for free.
Yeah, yes, it's not for free. And also it's connected to the points of the monetary system, because different countries have different abilities to do that.
Thank you very much. Now is the moment for Salvatore D'Acunto reply. So please come to the desk.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me thank Stefano for inviting me to discuss my book here and for his generous presentation. And I want to thank also all the colleagues who've contributed to this discussion. I'll try to answer the question you asked, but I'm afraid there won't be enough time, because you have talked about a lot of questions concerning the other chapters of the book, international economy, economics, the role of the international money, and so on, the role of fiscal policy that is dealing with in chapter 4, the monetary policy in the chapter 4, and so on. Then I think I'm afraid there won't be enough time to discuss all the topics. In any case, today's discussion will be food for thought in the coming weeks, certainly. I also ask you to apologize for my bad English. I hope you won't be too exigent for me. Let me start by telling you something about the story of this book. Teaching macroeconomics to undergraduate students through the monetary circuit is a very strange experiment, I understand. And then I think it's important to explain the roots of this idea. I think also that reconstructing the reasons of the book will help me to answer some of the critical observations raised in the discussion. The reason why I chose this framework were basically two. The first, in recent years, the division of society into groups with different roles in the economic organization has slowly disappeared from people's intellectual horizon. Completely disappeared. And I think this is a very dangerous phenomenon. Production is the most characteristically political sphere of social life. In the sphere of production, the different groups participating to cook the pie also search a compromise about the division of the pie among them, and eventually clash with each other in order to increase their slice of the pie, or at least to keep it stable. When people are no longer aware of this dimension of the sphere of production, they can no longer understand their position in economic, social, and political geography. When this happens, I think democracy is in danger. This is a fact that for me is very evident when I talk with my students. Let me give some example. At the beginning of my course, I usually try to provoke some discussions on some economic policy, current economic policy issues. What do you think of an increase in the ECB discount rate? What do you think about an introduction of a subsidy for the poor? Students invariably evaluate the impact of these measures in the light of their presumable impact on corporate profit. If the impact on corporate profit is presumed to be positive, the measure in question is assessed as good for the country's economy. Whereas in the opposite case, if the impact on corporate profit is presumed to be negative, the measure in question is assessed as bad for the country's economy. That is, when they think of the destiny of an economic system, every one of them adopts the point of view of the enterprise. When I tell them that an increase in profits may sometimes cause macroeconomic instability and recession, they look at me shocked. Is it possible? Profits fall and economy goes on. Profits increase and the economy goes down. I think that this fact of interpret the working of the economy with the glasses of corporate profits is a calamity. And I also believe that we professors of economics bear maybe some blame for this calamity. If social conflict is abolished from people's imagination, I think it's not just the fault of the financial establishment and the media that convey its vision of the world. Our profession, I think, has serious responsibilities. If we describe the economic system as an aggregation of representative agents, maximizing an individual utility function in a world of parametric price, as the majority of macroeconomics textbooks do, we contribute, I think, to cancel social conflict from people's imagination. If we worry exclusively about the GDP fluctuations and inflation rate, as unfortunately also Keynesian textbooks do, regardless of the fact that these phenomena generally have asymmetric effects on different social groups, then we contribute to abolish social conflict from people's imagination. So I couldn't consider myself blameless. I thought that I had to do something, obviously within the limits of my possibilities. I had to contribute to drawing, at least in the imagination of my students, a more realistic vision of the working of the economic system. Anna Maria asked me why I chose the monetary circuit model. But because the structures of the Graziani model doesn't stem from the process of expected utility maximization by some representative agent. On the contrary, its dynamics is the result of the always problematic interlocking between different groups of agents characterized by peculiar roles and conflicting interests. The mutual compatibility of the behaviors of these social groups is by no means taken for granted. Never. I don't think it's a mere equilibrium. Equilibrium is a possibility, but not the only possibility. Equilibrium is a possibility among many because the devices supposed to guarantee the harmonic reproduction of the system are too sensitive and therefore cannot be relied on. Not only, but moreover, the effectiveness of regulation devices in Graziani's model may be crucially conditioned precisely by the outcome of the social conflict. There is a dialectic between the sphere of production, the sphere of the social conflict, the distribution level of activity. In other words, the power relations between social groups and the resulting distribution structures are not irrelevant for the reproduction of the system. On the contrary, in Graziani's view, economic crises are generally viewed as the result of the breakdown of the social pact about the distribution of the pie. This is the first reason. And let me now come to the second reason for choosing the circuit model. Unfortunately, in my career, I have always taught in departments of law and political science to undergraduate students. The majority of students attending law or political science departments have little knowledge of quantitative disciplines and a strong general aversion towards symbolic languages in general. Mathematics, diagrams, equations, and even percentages are words that cause fear among them. When dealing with the student having such a thin quantitative knowledge background, we must be realistic. I think it's impossible to describe the structural relationships of an economy based on the logic of linear equation system, as the traditional ISLM and ADAS models do. And it's also impossible to explain the comparative static properties of an economy by relying on differential calculus. Anna Maria asked me to make the model dynamic. I think it's utopian. The monetary circuit model, on the contrary, has a very great advantage. The advantage of not requiring complex mathematical skills. It's an accounting model. A little simple algebra is sufficient. If you know how to add, to subtract, multiply, and divide, it becomes easy to follow the flows of money from one group of agents to another, to ask what distribution structures result from those flows, and whether they are compatible or not with an orderly reproduction of the system. In light of this premise, the perspective that guided my modeling strategy, I think should be clear. I wanted to keep the level of formal complexity low, with the constraint of not allowing the social conflict and its connection with crisis to disappear from the painting. This was my modeling strategy. Minimalist strategy, but I think in a certain sense useful to cross the river I mentioned above. Allow me to give some examples, drawing inspiration from your observations. Let me start from the bank loan rate controllers. Stefano and Hervé made some interesting considerations about the possibility to enrich with details both theoretical analysis and policy evaluations by introducing the interest rate on bank loans. Obviously, I wouldn't have anything against it if the target were an advanced macroeconomic course. However, I hope that the previous considerations have already clarified why I have instead chosen a modeling strategy more faithful to Graziani's model. As far as I know, in the analytical exposition of his circuit, Graziani has always avoided modeling the payment of interest by enterprises to banks. As far as I know. I'm not a very profundous expert in Graziani's texts, but I was a student of Graziani in Naples, at the University of Naples in 1987, some of his main texts I think of knowing sufficiently well. In Graziani's model, enterprises repay the capital borrowed but don't pay any interest. Banks lend money for free. They are non-profit banks in substance. And indeed, it may seem a somewhat strange way of designing a model whose intent is to demonstrate precisely that banks have a key role in income distribution. The Graziani's intent is, purpose is to demonstrate that banks have a very important role in income distribution. In fact, this is a hypothesis that has attracted a lot of criticism. Some have argued even that the interest puzzle is unsolvable within the logic structure of the monetary circuit. But in reality, Graziani's choice not to address the problem of interest was probably motivated by a mere desire for descriptive sobriety. In some works, he clearly says that the banking sector competes with other sectors for the distribution of the surplus value realized in the real economy, echoing Marx, obviously. He also says that if the bank loan rate changes, the power relation between the banking sector and the real sector will change too, and this will influence the outcomes of the model. Finally, Graziani has always said he is certain that no logical conceptual difficulties hinder the treatment of the bank rate within the monetary circuit. Obviously, this choice would change the size of the analytical structure, certainly reducing its manageability. And this purpose is always to keep things simple. And my purpose too. Let me now come to some observation of Anna Maria about the realism of the monetary circuit model. Anna Maria said that the monetary circuit is not a dynamic structure. And in a mail circulated among the group, you said that you wanted to ask me about the compatibility of Graziani's model with the financial instability hypothesis. Are they compatible? Good question. Graziani certainly thought so. He also wrote it quite explicitly in the introduction to the Italian edition of Can It Happen Again, where he actually put Miskin's theories of crisis within the structure of the circuit. When we discuss of the mutual compatibility of different models, we have to understand. The problem is to agree on what we believe are the essential features of the models in question. Now, I'm not an expert of Minsky, deep enough to be able to say what characterizes his view of the economic system, but he knows, based on my few, I underline, few Minskian readings, I would say that Minsky's crisis theory grounds on three factors: endogenous production of bubbles, increasing financial fragility, and the leveraging. If we agree on this, then I think it is not different from the depiction, not very different from the depiction of the crisis stemming from the monetary circuit. Obviously, in Graziani, there is no explanation of the endogenous production of bubbles. We don't really know why at a certain point agents run towards money. In fact, in the book, I have Keynes explain it, not Graziani. I quoted chapter 12 of General Theory and some papers from André Orléans. However, once money has been drained from circulation, banks become financially fragile and react by deleveraging. That is by cutting credit to firms. Then some firms become financially fragile and react by deleveraging. That is to say, by trying to cut unemployment and saving on wage costs. Unemployed people in turn deleverage by cutting expenditure on consumption goods, and so on in a vicious circle. If, on the contrary, we look to other aspects of modeling, for example, the form analytical structure, the time analytical structure, for example, or at the level of institutional detail. Graziani's model is a model with two assets, money and a capital good. Money and capital good. It is for the sake of simplicity, it is obvious. Nothing hinders to generalize the model, but it was a lover of simplicity. But obviously, we refer for characterizing a model to the time structure or the level of institutional detail. They are completely different. They are incompatible, maybe. Graziani model is substantially a one-period model. Essentially, everything happens in a world without a past. We could say on the day of the creation of the world, or at least on the day of the creation of capitalism. The model attempts to explain how a crisis can arise in a world still without credit-debit relationships. This is evidently a non-Miskian world. There are not credit and debits, and obviously then there are not neither covered positions, neither speculative positions, neither ultra-speculative positions. In Graziani models, it is the allocation of flows of saving between illiquid assets to money to play the key role in the crisis. And not the quick reallocation of stocks as in Minsky model. However, the choice of a one-period time structure and the consequent focus on flows rather than on stocks is evidently a narrative simplification. And nothing prevents us from adapting the model to the description of a world that also has a past, and therefore a pre-existent stock of debt. And I think that Marco and other influential young economists are working in this path. In any case, it's a very interesting topic, I admit it, which I'd like to explore in the future, perhaps with someone who knows Minsky's thought more in depth than me. 5 minutes?
Yes, go on.
I would like to spend the last 5 minutes discussing the policy implication of the circuit model presented in the book, as Stefano invited me to do. It is not easy to summarize, but I want to say one thing only. From my point of view, macroeconomic instability fundamentally depends on the inability of financial markets to effectively regulate the allocation of savings between illiquid assets and money. Financial markets destabilize instead of stabilizing. An obvious implication of this view is that we should try to limit their exuberance. Also, I know that Hervé doesn't like this expression. But let me use this metaphor. To limit financial markets exuberance was the advice by Keynes in chapter 12 of his general theory, when he jokingly wrote that it was necessary to apply excess barriers to financial markets similar to those applying to gambling houses. The problem is, how can we limit financial market exuberance? Obviously, there are a lot of tools: taxes on transactions, prohibitions on carrying out certain types of operation, and so on. But the most important limit comes, I think, from the monetary policy. The central bank may use her power to alter the expectations of speculators, of the agents operating in financial markets, so preventing asset prices to excessively inflate or to excessively fall. But it is very difficult to do so when financial markets are of a global dimension. The power of the central bank to do so is limited by her firepower. That is limited in comparison to the firepower of an enormous mass of speculators. And I want to conclude on this notation. If the financial markets are big as the whole world, it is simply impossible for a central bank to influence agent expectations about asset prices. And I think we are in face of a necessity to segment markets. If financial markets will not segment it, I think that also central bank is absolutely incapable of doing something. Thank you very much.
So thank you also to people that are connected online. Unfortunately, we have the possibility to discuss at the moment, but I just want to conclude by stressing the fact that the book deserves further discussion, both for didactics and research. And I hope that also Marco or other scholar engaged in the post-Keynesian world may organize other kind of presentation. And secondly, just for my students, the problem of finance, I think, is that its duty should be funding production in sustainable way, but it is not what happens. So we need an opportune institutional box for financial markets, and this is also the contents of next lecture that also Cristina will talk. Thank you very much again to everyone, and goodbye. Grazie.